I'm Evy. I have a Baby Lock Sashiko, and if you're watching this video, I bet you do too. I want to show you how to thread it today. The first time I threaded this machine, I was really scared. All the thread is in the bobbin. How odd is that? It was kind of scary and a bit intimidating, but after a little while, I learned a few tricks and some tips that really helped me, and I know they'll help you too. So let's get started. Okay, let's wind a bobbin. All the bobbin winding stuff is up on top. It looks like that's where you thread a regular machine, but that's just where you wind the bobbin for the Sashiko. But before we start that, I want you to look at this bobbin. Do you see how it has that blue tint to it? This is a class 15. It's kind of important because all of the work that this machine does is in the bobbin case, so it's important that you use really good bobbins. So when you wind a bobbin, you want it to be wound smoothly and evenly, and you don't want to have any extra thread tails sticking up above that or coming out of the bobbin anywhere else. Like for instance, you know, sometimes when you wind a bobbin, there'll be another little thread tail sticking out. Make sure you snip that off so Sassy Girl won't get confused. And make sure you use the class 15, the good blue tinted bobbins. I always check my bobbins by running my fingernail around the edge of each side to be sure there's no little glitches in the plastic. Sometimes when the bobbins are created, they're actually molded plastic pressed together. So there'll be a little extra bit around the edge and it will be hard and it extrudes out past the edge like a little bump. So what happens is when the thread is spooling off of the bobbin inside the bobbin case, that thread will get caught, will get hung on that little edge. And so the hook, as it passes around, will not pick up the thread as it properly should. So you'll have a missed stitch, or it just might not even stitch at all. It might just jam on you. So you definitely want to use good class 15 bobbins. And I like the kind that have the blue tint. Remember that. If you set it up here on your machine and you can see that it's blue, then you know that this is a good bobbin. All right, you ready to wind a bobbin? So let's put the thread in place first. And it goes up here, back on the little spindle. Make sure you use the spool cap. That just helps the thread to spool off of the spool evenly, and also if your thread has any rough places on the edge of the spool, that will keep the thread from hitting on them and making a mess. So now we'll come over here and we'll catch in that little hook, and then we're going to clip it into the tension. You hear that snap? And then the thread sits on that little horse. Now then, it's very important that it is in those three spots, that little hook and this tension guide, and it's sitting in that little horse. Now what I like to do, I have way too much thread here. What I like to do is insert the end of my thread into one of the big holes that's in my bobbin case. It does help to have good eyesight. Magnifying glasses. All right, I'll wind it a few times around the bobbin so that it's not floppy. And then I'll pop it down here on its little stand and I'll push the lever over, and now we'll wind the bobbin. That looks pretty good, doesn't it? You can take your foot off the foot pedal while the bobbin is winding and it'll keep going automatically, but just don't walk away from the machine. It's a good idea to keep your eye on Sassy Girl just in case the thread hops out of that little horse there. If it does that, then it will start winding underneath the bobbin and you'll have a really big mess. It is recommended that you always use the Sashiko machine to wind bobbins for this machine. However, I have learned in winding multiple bobbins for classes that other Baby Lock machines wind bobbins just as nice and neatly too. I use my Lismo all the time and she does a great job. Also, you should never use a side winder to wind a bobbin for this machine. Now our bobbin is all finished, so we'll pop it off here. And I want you to take a look at it. You see up close there, we've got two tails. Well, we can only have one tail, one that's coming off of the spool. This other tail I'm going to get rid of by snipping it as close as I can to the bobbin. There. So we don't want to confuse Sassy Girl as she's sewing the bobbin. And our bobbin is all finished. I also wanted to mention, just in case, I love using Maxi Lock swirls because they're beautiful. It's a nice strong thread. It's actually a serger thread, but it works really great with the Sashiko machine. So if you, like me, love this kind of thread and want to use it with your Sashiko machine and it doesn't come in a little spool, you can use a thread spool, a stand, you know, the kind that we use on other machines, and bring it back from the back up into that little clip and then up into the horse, just like that, and wind your bobbin using one of these tall cones too. So that's kind of good to know. because then you have a lot more variety of threads that you can use. Now let's thread the Sashiko machine. So our bobbin is all ready, but before we open the bobbin door, we need to press and hold the needle up-down button. I like to call this the doorbell. You wouldn't just barge into someone's house without knocking or ringing their doorbell, would you? So we press and hold it, ding dong, until Sashiko turns her porch light on. And once that light is on, now it's okay to open the door and you are welcome in. So let's turn the machine around here so you can see what I'm doing up close inside. Let's pull the bobbin out, an old-fashioned metal bobbin case. This bobbin case is very unique. You can see that little tail on the top. Some people call that the mohawk. I actually call it the bunny tail. And why do I call it the bunny tail? Well, because on the other side, there's bunny ears. Look at those little rabbit ears. There's 2 little holes in it. And the thread has to go through those. So the tail is there, and there are the ears. And when you put the threaded bobbin into the bobbin case, it needs to spool off of it clockwise, coming this way. So now we're going to go through this little C-clamp, through there, and through that little C-clamp, and it needs to move freely there. And now we're going to thread the rabbit ears. It helps to start with a nice clean end from the back of the bobbin to the front of the bobbin. So we're going to thread it through the rabbit ears. And I do so love it when I manage to do that the first time right. Okay, through both rabbit ears like that. Now, how does a rabbit go into his burrow? Does he go tail first or head first? Head first, right. So the ears go down and the tail is up. See, he's going head first into his little burrow. Now, I want you to look inside here. Right down there, you see that little cutout space? That's where the ears sit. And then you see that silver flange right there? That's the house where his tail slides behind. Now, this little fuzzy bit on the bobbin is an important little bit of fluff because it actually helps to sweep around the circle, the race of the machine there, and helps to keep that thread going smoothly and catching into the hook. Also, it keeps things a bit cleaner than it normally would be. But you want that tail to be perky and upright, so let's not smash the bobbin in like that, where it would flatten. If you were pushing this right into the case, see how it would just flatten against that silver? So crank the bobbin toward you so that the tail is facing you, and see how it slips behind that silver thing? Now crank it to the back, and the rabbit ears have clicked into place, and you see how that tail is housed nicely up behind his house. Now the bobbin is seated correctly. That was easy, right? All right, now what we're going to do is crank the flywheel once, twice, until thread appears coming up from there, and the needle is in the up position. I always pull my thread a little bit to make sure everything is coming smoothly. If it ever catches, then I know I have the bobbin in correctly. And so I'd stop, close the door, ring the doorbell, and start all over again. Okay, now I'm hold this in my hand just with a little tension. Not a lot, just a little. And I crank the flywheel again, once all the way around until Mr. Sassy has stuck out his foot and he's caught the thread in his big toe. If it doesn't look like that, it's not threaded. So it's helpful to always remember that. It's got to be caught on the big toe. Don't turn loose. Use your left hand to keep holding that thread while you use your right hand to reach underneath and close the bobbin door and then catch the thread in the thread cutter catcher. Now you should know a little bit about this here. This thread doesn't have to be cut here. It does need to be caught, but it doesn't have to be cut. So you can leave yourself a nice long tail just in case you need it. And for those of you who have sewn on Sashiko before, you do know that it's Murphy's Law. If you want it to unravel, it's going to be a little hard to do it. If you don't want it to unravel, then by golly, it sure will. So you'll leave yourself a little bit to play with. You can either thread it in the eye of a needle and take a couple stitches in place as needed, or you have a nice long tail to knot in place. There you go. That was easy, wasn't it? I hope that'll help you remember when you're threading your sassy girl. Now go make something pretty.